The cardboard box scraped against the hardwood floor. I nudged it with my foot, the sound echoing in the small room. Dad's room. It still smelled of him. A faint mix of old paper and the Irish Spring soap he always used. The funeral was 6 hours ago. My suit was still draped over the chair in my own bedroom, a dark shape waiting for me. But I couldn't sit still. The quiet of the house was too loud. So I started with the books. There were hundreds. They spilled from shelves, leaned in precarious stacks on the nightstand, and colonized the floor beside his reading chair. My back ached from the first box alone. I mumbled a complaint to the empty room, the words feeling dry and useless in my throat. My job was simple. Sort, box, and move. One box for donation, one for storage. A third, smaller box for the things I couldn't let go of. So far, it was empty. My fingers brushed against a familiar spine. Leaves of Grass. Whitman. We'd read it together when I was in high school. He'd quoted at the most random times. I am large, I contain multitudes. He'd said that last month, smiling after I'd found a stash of chocolate bars hidden in his sock drawer. My memory of the book was sharp. A specific mental photograph. A paperback with a sky blue cover, the title in a simple gold font. I pulled it from the shelf. My brow furrowed. The cover wasn't sky blue. It was a deep, somber navy, almost black in the dim light of the single lamp on the desk. I held it closer, turning it over in my hands. The gold font was right. The publisher's logo was right. But the color was wrong. Completely wrong. I shook my head, rubbing my eyes with the heel of my hand. The grit in them was real. I hadn't slept more than a few hours in the last week. The lights in here were terrible, casting long, distorted shadows. It had to be the light, or my brain, frayed and raw from grief and exhaustion. Just a trick of the mind. I tossed it into the donation box with a soft thud. It landed on top of a stack of old National Geographics. One less thing to think about. I turned back to the shelves, pulling down armfuls of dusty hardcovers and yellowed paperbacks. The work was mindless, a welcome rhythm of pull, inspect, and drop. My muscles protested, but the physical strain was a good distraction. I cleared another 2 shelves, the pile of boxes growing by the wall, the air filled with the scent of aging paper. I paused, stretching my back, and my gaze drifted back to the shelf I just cleared. It wasn't empty. A book was sitting there, second shelf, third from the left, exactly where it had been before. The spine faced out. Navy blue. Gold lettering, Leaves of Grass. The fatigue evaporated from my body, replaced by a sudden cold clarity. A prickle of awareness crawled up the back of my neck. I hadn't put it back. I knew, with a certainty that cut through the fog in my head, that I had dropped it into the cardboard box. I could still feel the weight of it leaving my hand, hear the flat sound it made when it landed. I took a slow, deliberate step back from the boxes. The floorboard under my foot gave a low groan. The sound was deafening. My own breathing seemed to stop. My eyes were fixed on the book. There was no doubt this time. The light from the lamp fell directly on it. The cover was a dark, rich navy blue. Not sky blue. I told my feet to move. They felt heavy, anchored to the floor. What the hell? I whispered. The words were a puff of air. I had to be sure. I had to touch it. Maybe I had 2 copies. Dad was like that sometimes. He'd buy a book he liked, forget he owned it, and buy it again. That had to be it. It was the only explanation that made any sense. I moved toward the bookshelf, my steps careful, as if walking on ice. My hand was outstretched, my fingers reaching for the spine. The wood of the shelf felt cool in the stuffy room. As my fingertips were an inch from the book, a wave of cold air washed over me. It was abrupt, like someone had opened a freezer door right beside me. It wasn't just a draft from under the door. It was a penetrating chill that seeped into my clothes and made my skin tighten. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. My eyes darted into the dark corners of the room, to the sliver of space behind the open door, to the wardrobe looming by the far wall. Nothing, just furniture and shadows. But the feeling was there, a tangible pressure, the feeling of being observed. Not by a ghost or some spirit. This was different. This felt like a pair of eyes. Physical. Patient. My gaze fell on my phone, lying screened down on the corner of Dad's desk. I needed to call my sister Sarah. I needed to hear another voice. I lunged for it, my fingers closing around the smooth plastic case. I flipped it over, my thumb jabbing at the power button on the side. Nothing. The screen remained a black, reflective void, I pressed it again, harder, still nothing. I held it down. The screen didn't flicker. It was dead. But I'd plugged it in myself this morning, right next to the coffee maker while I waited for it to brew. I saw the green battery icon. It was at 100%. The fact was as solid in my mind as the phone in my hand. A soft sound from across the room. A whish of air. I looked up. The bedroom door was moving. It wasn't slamming, it was closing. A slow, steady, and perfectly smooth arc. No creak from the hinges. No sound of a hand on the wood. It swung inward until it was nearly shut, then paused for a heartbeat, before closing the last few inches with a soft final click. The latch engaged. The sound was small, precise, and utterly terrifying. Someone had just closed it from the other side. Someone was in the hall. Someone was in the house. Panic, cold and sharp, drove a spike through my chest. My breath hitched. My first instinct was to scream, to yell, to pound on the door. But my throat closed up. My body knew better. Making noise was a bad idea. A very bad idea. My eyes scanned the room for a place to go. The bed was too open. The wardrobe was a trap. Then I saw it. Dad's old armchair, a hulking shape of cracked brown leather in the corner. I scrambled behind it on my hands and knees, my jeans scraping against the floor. I wedged myself into the space between the back of the chair and the wall, pulling my knees to my chest. The chair smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather. I pressed my face into the coarse fabric, trying to make myself smaller. I held my breath, straining to listen. I focused on the door. I expected to hear footsteps in the hall, the sound of a hand on the doorknob. A voice. Something. There was nothing. Just the low hum of the house around me. The ticking of a clock somewhere downstairs. The frantic, wet thumping of my own heart in my ears. The air was heavy and still. Time stretched, each second a long, taut wire. I counted them. 1, 2, 3. Then I heard it. It wasn't a footstep. It was a faint, almost inaudible creak of a single floorboard in the hallway just outside the door. The sound of weight being shifted. Slowly. Carefully. My blood ran cold. They were out there. Standing. Listening. Waiting. A drop of sweat traced a path from my temple down my cheek. It felt like a tear. I stayed perfectly still, my muscles screaming with tension. The silence returned, deeper this time. It felt like the silence of a predator that has spotted its prey and is enjoying the moment before the pounce. Minutes passed. I don't know how many. The clock downstairs chimed the half hour. The sound made me jump. Slowly, the feeling of the immediate presence outside the door began to fade. The pressure in the air lessened. The creak didn't come again. I stayed hidden for a long time after that, until my legs began to cramp. Finally, with a shuddering breath, I forced myself to move. I rose slowly, unsteadily, using the back of the armchair for support. My legs felt like they were filled with sand. I peered over the top of the chair. The room was exactly as I had left it. The door was still closed. The lamp on the desk still cast its weak, yellow light. My eyes went, against my will, to the bookshelf. To the second shelf, third from the left. The book was there. But it wasn't navy blue anymore. The cover was red. A deep, glistening red. Not the matte red of a normal book cover. This was wet. It shone in the lamplight, slick and viscous. A darker, thicker smear, the color of rust, ran from the gilded letters of the title down to the bottom edge. It looked like a clumsy fingerprint. It looked fresh. My gaze was fixed on the book. The red was not paint. It was slick, catching the yellow lamplight in a way that made it seem to shift. The smear running down from the title was darker, the color of dried blood on asphalt. I did not touch it. I did not need to. I could smell it from where I stood, a faint coppery tang that mixed with the dust and old paper. It was the scent from the hospital. The scent of the end. A single thought cut through the buzzing in my ears. Get out. I backed away from the bookshelf, my feet shuffling, unwilling to turn my back on the room. One step, then another. My hand found the wall, the cool, textured paint, a small point of reality. I slid along it, my eyes still locked on that glistening red cover, until my shoulder bumped against the doorframe. I fumbled behind me for the handle of the bedroom door, the one that had clicked shut on its own. It was cold, hard brass. Normal. It turned easily in my sweaty palm. I pulled it open and stumbled out into the hallway, pulling it shut behind me without looking back. The latch caught with a solid sound. I stood in the dim hall, my chest heaving, taking in air that didn't smell of iron. The floorboards were cool beneath my socks. The house was quiet. The clock in the living room downstairs ticked, tick, tock, a steady, mechanical rhythm. I clung to that sound. It was real. It was sane. I had to get out of the house. I had to get in my car and drive until the sun came up. I went down the stairs, my hand gripping the wooden banister so tightly my knuckles ached. I took the steps 2 at a time, landing softly on the runner. The living room was dark, shapes and shadows defined by the pale moonlight filtering through the large bay window, the couch, the coffee table, the fireplace, and in the corner, Dad's old turntable console, a long, low block of dark walnut. My keys were on the small table by the front door. I saw them, a small dark shape on the wood. It was 20 feet away. My legs would not move. My body refused to take me toward the door, toward the outside. A part of me, deep and primal, knew that trying the front door right now was a bad idea. The memory of the soft click of the bedroom door latching was too fresh. I needed noise. I needed to fill the space with something other than the ticking clock and the sound of my own ragged breathing, something to push back against the pressure I felt gathering in the shadows. My feet carried me not to the door, but to the turntable. The lid lifted with a soft sigh of oiled hinges. Inside, the felt-covered platter was clean. A record was already on it. Beethoven's 7th, the second movement, the Allegretto, the funeral march he'd always wanted. He'd told me that a dozen times. When I go, play this. It's the most honest piece of music ever written. My hands were shaking, but the movements were automatic. I powered it on. A low hum filled the air. I lifted the tone arm, its metallic length cool against my fingertips, and guided the needle toward the outer edge of the black vinyl disc. It settled into the groove with a soft, familiar crackle. A moment of static, and then the music began. The low strings, the mournful, walking pace of the melody. It was a sound I knew as well as my own name. It filled the room, a wave of beautiful, structured sorrow. I closed my eyes, letting the sound wash over me, trying to let it scour the image of the red book from my mind. The strings swelled, joined by the woodwinds. The music built. I knew every note, every rise and fall. My muscles began to unknot. The air in my lungs felt a little cleaner. It happened during the second statement of the theme. A note, from the oboe line, went sharp. It was just for a fraction of a second, a sour, discordant pitch that stabbed through the harmony before resolving. It was like a shard of glass in a spoonful of honey. I flinched. My eyes snapped open. I stood there, listening as the orchestra continued, the melody now sounding fragile, tainted. An old record. That's all it was. 100 years old, played 1,000 times on this very machine. A bit of dust, a worn groove. A skip. Nothing more. The explanation was simple, logical. I repeated it in my head. It's a scratch. It's just a scratch. I told myself to let it go, to let the music play. But I couldn't. The phantom of that sour note lingered in my ears. I couldn't let it be. I needed to be sure. I moved back to the console, a feeling of irritation rising in my chest. This felt like another trick, another blue cover that was navy, another phone that was full and then dead. I lifted the needle, the music cutting off abruptly into a hiss. I guided the arm back, my hand steady this time, and dropped it a few seconds before the passage in question. The low strings re-entered. The familiar, sad melody began its walk. I leaned closer, my ear near the speaker grill wrapped in its coarse fabric. The theme played through. The second statement began. The oboe melody floated above the orchestra. And there it was. It wasn't a skip this time. It wasn't short or sharp. The note started on the correct pitch, then slid upward, bending into that same sour, unnatural frequency. But this time it didn't resolve. It held. It stretched, a high, thin groan that vibrated against the other instruments, a sound of agony woven into the fabric of the symphony. It lasted for 3, maybe 4 seconds, a pure, deliberate corruption, before the orchestra moved on, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. That was not a scratch. A scratch was a tick, a pop, a jump. This was a change. Something had rewritten the music. A hot surge of anger went through me. I reached out and slapped the power button. The turntable spun down with a low whir. The tone arm remained where it was, a silent witness. The music was gone. But the sound was not. The groan of that single wrong note continued. It was faint now, a whisper of a sound, but it was there. It wasn't coming from the speakers. I pressed my ear against the grill. Nothing but silence. I stood up straight. The note was still there. It seemed to be coming from the far wall, near the fireplace. I took a step toward it, and the sound seemed to shift, now coming from the corner by the bay window. I turned my head quickly. It was everywhere at once, a thin, reedy echo that had detached from its source and now saturated the air of the room. It was inside the walls, humming in the plaster. The panic came back, a cold flood this time. I had to get out. Not just out of the room, but out of the house. Now. The logic from before, the caution, it was all gone. I didn't care what was on the other side of the door. Nothing could be worse than this. I launched myself across the room. My feet tangled in the thick throw rug, and I nearly went down, my arms windmilling. I caught my balance and lunged the last few feet to the front door, my hand reaching for the deadbolt and the doorknob below it. My fingers closed around the knob. It wasn't cold. It was warm, with the deep, damp heat of living tissue. It wasn't hard metal. It yielded, just slightly, under the pressure of my grip, like a piece of hard cartilage. A slick, tacky film coated its surface, and my skin stuck to it. A wave of nausea rolled up from my stomach. I gagged, snatching my hand back as if I'd touched something hot. I looked at my palm. It was clean, but the feeling lingered, a phantom stickiness. I stared at the doorknob. In the moonlight, it still looked like brass. A simple, round, polished brass knob. But my fingers knew what they had felt. I forced myself to reach out again, my fingertips just brushing the surface. Warm. Soft. Alive. It would not turn. I knew it without trying. I was locked in. The humming note from the walls seemed to get a little louder, a mocking commentary. Something snapped inside my head. The fear turned to a blind, white-hot rage. A scream was building in my chest, a pressure that needed an outlet. My eyes darted around the room, wild and searching, and they landed on the source of it all, the turntable console, the machine that had birthed this sound. I let out a raw, wordless bellow and charged it. I didn't use my hands. I drew my leg back and kicked, putting all my weight, all my terror, all my anger into the blow. My foot connected with a walnut cabinet with a sound like a gunshot. Wood splintered. The entire console tipped backward, crashing against the floor. The plastic dust cover shattered. The tone arm snapped. The heavy platter dislodged, rolling across the carpet before coming to a stop face down. The music was dead, broken, silenced. The humming from the walls stopped. For a single, blessed second, there was silence. And then the sound started again. Not from the walls, not from the speakers. It was inside my head. It was not a memory of a sound. It was a physical feeling. A high-frequency vibration started at the base of my skull, a powerful, focused tremor that rattled my teeth in their sockets. It was the wrong note, the sour, groaning pitch, but now it was a physical force, buzzing directly against my bone. The room swam. My vision blurred at the edges. The vibration intensified, a dental drill boring into my brainstem. It was torture. I could feel it in my jaw, behind my eyes, a resonant agony that made thought impossible. I had to make it stop. I had to drown it out. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it did nothing. The sound wasn't coming from outside. I opened my mouth and I screamed. It was not a cry for help. It was a desperate, animal attempt to make a louder noise inside my own skull. A raw, tearing sound tore from my throat, on and on. A single note of pure desperation against the clean, precise torment of the vibration. My scream died in my throat as the vibration, without warning, simply ceased. The sudden absence of it was as shocking as its arrival. It left a vacuum in its wake. A ringing silence that was almost as painful. My knees gave out. I collapsed onto the floor, landing hard on the thick rug amidst the debris of the broken turntable. I stayed there on my hands and knees, head bowed, gasping. Air burned in my lungs. My whole body trembled with the aftershocks of the ordeal. Sweat dripped from my forehead onto the carpet, making small, dark circles. Minutes passed. The ticking of the clock had returned. Tick, tock. It was the only sound. Slowly, shakily, I pushed myself up into a sitting position. My back was against the leg of the sofa. My head felt heavy, bruised from the inside. When I was sure my legs would hold me, I looked up. My gaze fell upon the far wall, above the fireplace. On the portrait of my father. It was a photograph I'd had enlarged for his 60th birthday. He was in his favorite chair, the one in the bedroom upstairs, a book in his lap. The light from a window was catching the silver in his hair. He was looking at my mother, who had been standing just to the side of the camera. The expression I knew so well was one of gentle, tired amusement. A loving, patient smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes. That was not the expression on his face now. The man in the portrait was still looking in the same direction, but the smile was different. The mouth was closed, the lips pressed together in a thin line, the corners pulled back just a little too far. It wasn't a smile of warmth. It was a smirk. Contained. Knowing. The crinkles around the eyes were gone. Instead, the eyes themselves seemed harder, more focused. It was the look of someone enjoying a cruel private joke at another's expense. And he was looking right at me. My knees were on the rug. The sharp edges of the broken plastic dust cover pressed into my shins. My breath came in shallow, ragged bursts. The air tasted of dust and ozone. My gaze was fixed on the wall, on the face in the photograph, the smirk, the cold, knowing eyes that were not his. It was a violation, a desecration of a memory I had thought was mine alone. The face in the frame watched me, a silent observer enjoying my collapse. I pushed myself backward, away from it, my palms scraping against the wool fibers of the rug. My back hit the leg of the sofa. I stayed there, crouched on the floor, using the solid piece of furniture as an anchor in a room that was beginning to feel like it was made of water. I needed proof. My mind was a storm of noise. The phantom reedy note, the memory of the warm doorknob, the sight of that face. I needed something solid. Something that could not be a trick of the light or a product of a mind strained to its breaking point. The bookshelf. Beside the fireplace. It was filled with old things. Photo albums. His whole life, her whole life, documented in faded color squares behind thin sheets of plastic. I got to my feet. My legs felt unsteady, like a newborn foal's. I moved across the room, my eyes avoiding the portrait, focusing instead on the spines of the leather-bound albums on the second shelf. They were dusty. I hadn't touched them since before. My fingers closed around a thick, brown vinyl album, 1998 to 2002. I pulled it free. It was heavy. I carried it to the coffee table, clearing a space amidst the clutter of old magazines. I sat on the edge of the sofa and opened it. The first page was a family trip to the Grand Canyon. I saw myself, a skinny teenager with a bad haircut. Squinting in the sun, I saw my mother, her arm around my sister Liz. And I saw my father, standing slightly apart, his hands in his pockets, gazing out at the immense space. I remembered that trip. I remembered the heat coming off the asphalt in the parking lot. I remembered the taste of the warm water from our canteens. I turned the page. And another. My hands were shaking, making the plastic sheets crinkle. I was looking for one specific photograph. One specific day. I knew exactly what it looked like. The annual town picnic. 2001. We always went. It was a tradition. I found it on the fourth page. My breath caught in my chest. There we were, all four of us, sitting on a blue checkered blanket under the big oak tree by the pond. Liz was holding up a half-eaten hot dog. My mother was laughing. I was looking away, probably at some girl I had a crush on. And my father, he was sitting cross-legged, a paper plate of potato salad in his lap. He was wearing his favorite shirt. A thick, red and black buffalo plaid flannel shirt. I remembered it because I had borrowed it the following winter. I remembered the rough texture of the wool, the way it smelled of him, of soap and Old Spice. I blinked. I looked at the photograph. The man in the picture, the man who was my father, was not wearing a red and black plaid shirt. He was wearing a short-sleeved, button-down shirt. It had thin, vertical stripes. Blue and white. The weave looked like smooth cotton. It was a shirt I had never seen before in my life. I closed my eyes. Hard. I counted to 5. The numbers a frantic litany in my head. This is grief. This is exhaustion. You cared for a dying man for 6 months. Your brain is broken. You are misremembering. I opened my eyes again. The blue and white stripes remained. They were sharp and clear under the faded, yellowed plastic. The shirt was tucked into his jeans. There was a small pocket on the left breast. No, I was not misremembering. That plaid shirt was his uniform for any outdoor event where the temperature was below 70 degrees. It was as much a part of him as the silver in his hair. I could feel the memory of that flannel in my fingertips. I could smell the scent of it. That feeling was real. This photograph was not. My phone. I needed an outside line. I needed another pair of eyes that were not locked inside this house with me. I fumbled in my pocket, my fingers clumsy. I pulled it out. The screen lit up. Full bars. 73% battery. It was a miracle. A small, glowing island of normalcy. I found Liz's contact and pressed the call button. I lifted the phone to my ear, listening to the electronic chirp of the ring. It felt impossibly loud in the silent room. 1 ring. 2. Hello? Her voice was thick with sleep, laced with irritation. Liz? Hey, it's me. A sigh. What's wrong? It's 2 in the morning. I know. I'm sorry. I have a weird question. I stared at the picture. The town picnics. Do you remember them? The ones at Miller Park. Yeah, of course, she slurred, her voice muffled like her face was in a pillow. What about them? Dad's shirt. The one he always wore. The red one. There was a pause. I heard the sound of her shifting in bed. What red one? She asked, her voice a little clearer now, a little more annoyed. He always wore that stupid preppy one. The blue and white striped one. He thought it made him look like he was on a boat. She yawned. Why are you calling me about Dad's fashion choices? Are you okay? The floor dropped out from under me. The words hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked all the air out. It wasn't me. It wasn't my memory. She remembered it too. She remembered the lie. The reality I was in, this version of the world, had been altered. And she was in it with me. No, I whispered. My own voice sounded distant. No, what? Liz asked. Look, can this wait until... Her voice cut off. It was replaced by a sound like a rushing faucet, a harsh, white noise static that filled my ear. Liz? I said, louder. Liz, are you there? Through the static, something else emerged. It was not a voice. It was a series of clicks, wet, percussive sounds, like pebbles being dropped into mud, arranged in a cadence that was almost speech. It was low and guttural. It felt ancient. It felt wrong. The sound crawled down the phone line and seemed to curdle the air in the room. Hello? I yelled, my voice cracking. The clicking stopped. The static hissed for another second. Then the line went dead. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at the screen. The call had been terminated, and in the top left corner, where the signal bars had been full just a moment ago, it now read a single stark phrase, no service. The connection was gone. I was alone. The house felt different now. The walls seemed to have moved closer. The silence was heavier. Before, it had just been quiet. Now, it was a sealed quiet. The lack of any sound from outside, no distant traffic, no barking dog, no hum of the city, was absolute. It was like being at the bottom of a deep well. I had to move. I couldn't stay in this room with that face in the portrait. I pushed myself up, leaving the photo album open on the table. I walked into the hallway. The stairs leading up into the darkness were a black maw. I thought of the bedroom door upstairs, the soft click as it latched itself. I had to know what was up there. The thought was insane, but the alternative, staying down here, waiting, was worse. I needed an equalizer. Something. Anything. My eyes scanned the entryway. By the door, in a tall wicker basket, was my father's cane, the one he'd used in the last few months. A simple wooden cane with a curved handle and a rubber tip. I grabbed it. The wood was smooth and cool in my sweaty palm. It was light, pathetic as a weapon, but it was solid. It was something to hold. I gripped it like a club and started up the stairs, placing my feet carefully to avoid any creaks. The air grew colder as I ascended. I reached the landing. The hallway stretched before me, a tunnel of shadow. The door to his bedroom was at the far end. It was closed. That's when I heard it. It was a small sound, a dry, scraping noise. It came from inside the bedroom. I froze, my hand tightening on the cane. It sounded like a fingernail being dragged slowly across unfinished wood. It scraped for a few inches, then stopped. Then it started again, from a different spot. A short, sharp scratch. And another. It was coming from the closet. The large, dark oak wardrobe against the far wall. The wardrobe I had emptied myself 3 days ago. I had taken out every lashed shirt, every pair of pants. I had folded them and put them in boxes for goodwill. I knew for a fact that it was empty. I had wiped down the shelves and the cedar floor myself. The scraping became more frantic. A flurry of quick, desperate scratches, like an animal trapped inside, clawing at the door. My heart hammered against my ribs, a painful, frantic beat. I took a step back, my muscles screaming at me to run, to get down the stairs and cower in the living room. But I couldn't. I was pinned to the spot by the sound. I listened, holding my breath. The scratching stopped. The abrupt silence that followed was somehow more terrifying. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my knuckles white on the handle of the cane, my eyes locked on the bedroom door. The doorknob began to turn. It moved slowly, without a sound. A quarter turned to the right. There was no click from the latch. It just turned, smooth as if it were oiled. The door swung inward, opening into the deeper darkness of the room. It stopped when it was halfway open, a silent invitation. I did not move. I did not breathe. A minute passed. The house was still. Fury, cold and sharp, cut through the fear. This was my house. That was my father's room. I would not be hunted in it. I raised the cane and walked forward, my steps deliberate. I reached the doorway and stopped, peering into the room. The moonlight from the window was weak, casting long shadows. I could see the shape of the bed, the nightstand, the empty armchair. And across the room, the wardrobe. Its doors were shut. As I watched, the right-hand door of the wardrobe shuddered. It swung open, moving with that same unnatural, silent grace as the bedroom door had. It moved slowly, deliberately, opening into the room until it was fully ajar, revealing the blackness within. My throat was dry. I took a hesitant step into the room, then another. The cane was out in front of me, a useless wooden stick. The air inside the room was frigid. I approached the wardrobe, my eyes trying to pierce the shadows inside. I was expecting to see something. A figure, a shape, anything. The wardrobe was empty, just as I had left it. A row of empty wooden hangers hung from the metal rail, casting thin, rib-like shadows. The back wall of the closet was bare. There was nothing there. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me, so potent it made my knees weak. My mind. It had to be my mind. The sound, the opening doors, it was a hallucination. There was nothing here. My gaze drifted downward, to the floor of the wardrobe. And there it was. It was placed perfectly in the center of the cedar floor. A short-sleeved, button-down shirt. It was folded into a neat, pristine square. The stripes were thin, blue and white. I stood there, my breath held captive in my lungs. My eyes were fixed on the square of folded fabric on the wardrobe floor. A chill, entirely separate from the cold in the room, traced a path down my spine. The shirt was a period at the end of a sentence I could not understand. A statement. It wasn't a threat. It was a correction. A quiet, meticulous tidying of reality. The plaid shirt was a mistake. This blue and white one was correct. My memory was the thing that needed to be folded and put away. That thought broke the paralysis. It was a clean snap, like a dry twig under a boot. It wasn't a decision, it was an electrical impulse. Get out. The command originated somewhere deep in my hindbrain, bypassing all rational thought. I turned, not bothering to be quiet. My shoulder bumped the doorframe as I stumbled back into the hall. The cane I had been gripping fell from my numb fingers, clattering on the hardwood floor. I did not look back. I took the stairs 2, sometimes 3 at a time. My feet were clumsy, my balance was gone. I slammed into the wall at the bottom of the staircase, the impact jarring my teeth. The framed portrait was in my peripheral vision, but I refused to look at it. I could feel the face in it, feel the smirk aimed at my back as I scrambled for the front door. The house was a trap. Every object in it was a lie, a carefully placed piece of bait. The keys. I needed the car keys. They were on the small wooden shelf by the door, in a little ceramic bowl my mother had made in a pottery class. My fingers scrabbled in the bowl, raking through loose change and old receipts. The metal was cold. I snatched the keyring. The familiar weight in my hand was the first thing that had felt right in hours. A dull brass key for the main apartment building door. A silver key for the deadbolt. A black plastic fob for my car. Normal. Solid. I fumbled with the deadbolt. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the key into the lock. The bolt slid back with a loud mechanical thunk. I twisted the knob, pulled the door open, and threw myself out into the hallway of the building. I didn't stop to close the door behind me. I just ran. The hallway was quiet. The runner carpet muffled my frantic footsteps. The air was stale, smelling of old paint and disinfectant. I hit the button for the elevator, my thumb mashing it again and again. The light didn't come on. Broken. Of course. The stairwell door was 10 feet away. I shoved it open and plunged down the concrete steps, the sound of my sneakers echoing in the tight space. 3 flights down. The metal handrail was cold and slick under my palm. I emerged into the lobby, a sterile space of tile floors and fake plants. The glass doors leading outside were 100 feet away. Freedom. I burst through them, and into the night air. It was cool and damp. It filled my lungs, a welcome shock after the stagnant atmosphere of the apartment. I was in the parking lot. The rows of cars sat silent under the yellow-orange glow of the security lamps. My car was where I always left it. 3rd row, 5th space from the end. A dark blue sedan. I slowed to a fast walk, my breath still coming in ragged gasps, and thumbed the unlock button on my fob. The car chirped, and its lights flashed once. A beautiful, reassuring sound. I reached the driver's side door, pulled the handle, and slid into the seat. I slammed the door shut, locking myself in. I was safe. A bubble of steel and glass. I jammed the key into the ignition. It didn't go in. I pushed. It stopped a 1/4 of an inch in, met with solid resistance. I pulled it out, looked at it. The key was fine. I tried again, jiggling it this time. Nothing. It wouldn't turn. It felt like I was trying to push a key into a solid piece of metal. "What the hell?" I whispered, the words a puff of vapor in the cold air. "Come on!" My eyes fell on the steering wheel. The yellow light from the parking lamp above cast a clear, ugly sheen on the plastic. In the center of the wheel was the manufacturer's logo. It was supposed to be a simple, stylized silver H. I had seen it thousands of times. It was not a stylized H anymore. The chrome shape was there, but it was subtly altered. The 2 vertical pillars of the H were curved inward, like parentheses. The horizontal bar connecting them was gone, replaced by 3 small, precise dots arranged in a triangle. It looked official. It looked like it had been manufactured that way. A wave of nausea rolled through me. "No," I said to the empty car. "No. This was my car. I knew it was." The scuff mark on the dashboard was there. The small crack in the plastic of the gear shift was there. The stack of old parking permits stuck to the passenger side visor was there. But the key didn't fit. The logo was wrong. My head snapped up. I looked past my own reflection in the window. My gaze swept across the parking lot. The car next to mine, a white SUV belonging to Mr. Henderson from 3B. I knew it was a Ford. The blue oval on its grille was still blue. But the script inside it wasn't the familiar flowing Ford signature. It was a single, blocky, Cyrillic-looking letter. I leaned forward, my face pressing against the cold glass. The car beyond that one, a red Toyota. Its triple oval emblem was there, but the ovals were not interwoven. They were separate, concentric, like a bullseye. Every car. I scanned the rows, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. a Honda with its logo warped, a Chevrolet whose bow tie emblem now looked more like a bent cross, a Nissan whose central bar was missing, leaving just an empty circle. They were all wrong. Every single one. They were small changes, subtle corruptions. The kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were looking. Unless you had been primed to see the cracks. The panic that had been a sharp spike was now a rising flood. It wasn't the house. It wasn't my father. It wasn't me. It was everything. The world was being rewritten, and the parking lot was page 1. I threw the car door open and scrambled out. My legs felt weak. I was standing in a sea of subtly alien artifacts. I had to get back inside. The logic was insane, to run from one trap back into another, but the vast open wrongness of the parking lot was too much to bear. The apartment building was a known quantity. A monster I had at least met. I ran. My feet pounded on the asphalt. I dodged the hood of a car with a brand I had never seen, a logo like a stylized scorpion. I reached the glass lobby doors and fumbled for my keyring again. The brass building key. I pushed it toward the lock. It slid in, but it felt wrong. It wasn't a smooth entry. It grated. The metal inside felt coarse, misaligned, as if the tumblers were cut to a slightly different pattern. I had to force it, my wrist aching with the pressure, until it finally seated. I turned it. With a rough, grinding click, the lock disengaged. I shoved the door, ready to run back up the stairs, back to the apartment. I had to see the portrait again. I had to look at the album. I needed to confirm the rules of my new prison. As my weight pushed against the door, it suddenly gave way with impossible ease. It was not me opening it. I had been pushing against a resisting force, and that force vanished. My momentum carried me forward, my body lurching uncontrollably. It felt as though the door had been violently yanked open from the inside. I fell. I hit the polished tile floor of the lobby hard, my hands scraping, my chin smacking against the ground. An explosion of pain shot through my jaw. Before I could even register what had happened, the glass door slammed shut behind me. It wasn't the gentle hiss of the hydraulic arm. It was a boom. A solid, final sound of immense force, like a bank vault being sealed. The entire frame shuddered. The noise echoed in the small lobby, sharp and violent. I was on the floor, dazed, tasting blood in my mouth. I rolled over, propping myself up on my elbows. I was alone. There was no one there. No one had pulled the door. No one had slammed it. I scrambled backward on my hands and feet, away from the door, until my back hit the cool plaster of the far wall. I stared at the entrance. It was just a glass door. The street and the wrongly badged cars were still visible through it. I was trapped, I yelled then. A raw, ragged sound clawed its way out of my throat. I pushed myself to my feet and threw myself at the door, pounding on the glass with my fists. It didn't budge. I pulled on the handle. It felt like it was welded to the frame. I screamed for help, my voice cracking, my raw throat burning. My cries were swallowed by the small, sealed space. Then, the lights went out. One moment, the lobby was lit by the clean, white, fluorescent tubes on the ceiling. The next, it was plunged into absolute blackness. The sudden change was disorienting. I froze, my hands still on the door handle. I couldn't hear anything but the frantic thumping of my own heart and the harsh sound of my breathing. A low hum started. The lights flickered. On. Off. On, off. A strobe effect that broke my vision into a series of frozen, terrifying snapshots. The lobby. The fake plant. My own hands. The door. The lobby. The fake plant. The lights buzzed again and then came on, staying on. They seemed brighter now, harsher. I stood there, panting, my entire body trembling. I was still there. I was okay. Nothing had touched me. My gaze drifted upward. Above the door I had just been pounding on, there was a sign there, a standard building code sign, a green rectangle with white letters. I had seen it 1,000 times without ever really seeing it. It was supposed to say Loy Thote. It didn't say that anymore. The green rectangle was still there. The white coloring was still there. But the letters, the familiar shapes that formed the word for exit, had been replaced. They were some kind of bizarre angular script, The L was gone. In its place, a symbol like a pitchfork with a broken tine. The O was a circle with a jagged line cutting through it. The I was a simple vertical slash, but next to it, where the T should have been, was a shape like a shepherd's crook, turned on its side. Each character was precise, clean, and utterly alien. They felt ancient. They were not human letters. I wasn't in my building anymore. I was inside something else. Something that was wearing my building like a skin, and I had just run right back into its mouth. My body was a thing on the floor. My jaw throbbed, a deep, radiating ache from where it had met the tile. I tasted iron and saliva. I pushed myself up with my palms, the scraped skin stinging. The lobby was the same. The waxy, fake plant stood in its pot. The mailboxes were set into the wall. But the air was heavy, still. The violent boom of the door slamming shut hung in the space like dust. It was an event that had changed the physics of the room. My eyes snapped to the glass door. I was inside. It was outside. It hadn't followed me. The logic was broken, but it was all I had. I was locked in with the source. I shoved myself to my feet, my legs unsteady. The sign above the door held my gaze. Loithot. The memory of the word was sharp. The reality was a smear of alien grammar, symbols that looked like broken tools, and celestial diagrams. They were cut with a confident, effortless precision. This was not a prank. This was a revision. There was nowhere to go but up. I turned my back on the exit that was no longer an exit and faced the stairwell. The door stood ajar. I walked toward it, each footstep a loud report in the new silence. I went up the concrete steps, my hand trailing on the cool metal rail. My apartment door was at the end of the third-floor hall, wide open. A dark rectangle inviting me back in. I hadn't closed it. I had run. Now I walked back through the opening without a choice. I closed the door behind me. I turned the deadbolt. The thunk of the lock was a small, temporary comfort. The apartment was as I had left it. A glass of water on the coffee table. My jacket thrown over a chair. A world of familiar shapes. But I knew the truth. They were props on a stage that was being rebuilt around me. I needed an anchor, something to hold on to, something to prove I was still here. I walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room. My father had used it for bills and letters. A cheap ballpoint pen lay next to a thin stack of notepaper. I picked up the pen. The plastic felt solid in my grip. A real object. I sat down, pulled a single sheet of paper toward me, and flattened it with my palm. I would write it down. I would record what was happening. If I could describe it, I could contain it. I could make it real in a way I could understand. I pressed the tip of the pen to the paper. The small ball bearing made a mark. Good. It worked. I formed the first letter. Then, the next. My hand felt slow, deliberate. The muscles in my forearm were tight. It felt like I was learning to write for the first time, my brain sending signals that my hand was hesitant to obey. I finished the sentence. Or, the beginning of one. My name is Jacob. I lifted the pen and looked down at the words. A cold wash went through my stomach. It was my handwriting. I recognized the general shape, the slight rightward slant. But it was wrong. It was a copy made by a student trying to perfectly replicate a teacher's script. The cross on the T was too high, an almost separate mark floating above the stem. The dot on the J was a perfect heavy circle, not the quick dash I always made. The loop on the Y was closed so tightly it looked like an O with a tail. It was my handwriting, but with no life in it. It was a meticulous, dead forgery. A translation error. My own hand had betrayed me. My breathing hitched. I looked away from the paper, my eyes scanning the room for something, anything, that was still true. My gaze fell on the newspaper folded on the coffee table. The Boston Globe. I glanced at it this morning. A story about city council zoning. A photo of a traffic jam on the I-93. Normal. It was not normal now. I stood and walked over to it, my legs stiff. I didn't need to pick it up. From 3 feet away I could see it. The masthead. The bold Gothic script of the newspaper's name was still there in shape. But the letters B-O-S-T-O-N were gone. In their place were the same jagged symbols from the lobby sign. The main headline, a large, bold pronouncement, was a string of these characters. The columns of text beneath it, once filled with thousands of familiar words, were now dense blocks of the impossible script. Pictures were still there. The traffic jam. A politician smiling. But the captions beneath them were gibberish. The entire language of my world had been overwritten while I was gone. The paper had been updated. My mouth opened. A sound built in my chest. A pressure demanding release. A scream. I needed to scream. I drew in a ragged breath, my throat tightening, my vocal cords tensing for the eruption. It wasn't a scream. What came out of me was a noise I had never heard. It was not human. It started as a low vibration in my chest, then climbed my throat and scraped against the back of my palate. It was a wet, chittering sound, full of clicks and rough edges. It felt like my tongue was the wrong shape in my mouth. I felt the sound more than I heard it, a complex resonance in my sinuses that was utterly foreign. Horror shot through me, colder and sharper than anything before. I slapped my hands over my mouth, cutting off the noise. My fingers pressed hard against my lips. I could still feel the vibration in my jawbone. I was a vessel for that sound. It was inside me. As if triggered by my failed scream, a low hum started in the room. The television screen across the room flickered to life, not to a channel, but to a blank, bright blue. Then my father's old desktop computer on the desk whirred, its monitor glowing. My cell phone, lying on its charger by the couch, lit up. One by one, every screen in the apartment activated, each one bathing the room in a cold, sterile light. And on each screen, the same thing appeared. A single, pulsing line of the runic text. It glowed with a soft, white intensity. One statement, broadcast on every available surface. A system-wide message. The hum from the electronics stopped. The pulsing line of text remained. I stood in the middle of the room, my hands still covering my mouth, my eyes wide. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was an expectant silence. Then, from the kitchen, a new sound began. It wasn't a footstep. It wasn't a creak. It was a moist, dragging rustle, the sound of wet canvas being pulled slowly across linoleum. A weight being shifted. Something slick. Something heavy. The parasite. The thought was not mine. It was an instinct. It was here. It was active. My body moved without my permission. I didn't run. I dropped. I fell to my hands and knees and scrambled, crab-like, toward the bedroom. I slid across the wooden floor and pushed myself under the bed, my cheek pressed against the dusty floorboards. The smell of old wood and forgotten dust filled my nose. I curled into a ball, pulling my knees to my chest, my hands still clamped over my mouth. I had to be quiet. I could not make that sound from my throat again. I could not let it know I was here. Crying was not an option. Through the narrow, dusty gap between the bottom of the bed frame and the floor, I had a sliver of a view. I could see the bottom 6 inches of the bedroom door, and the strip of hallway carpet beyond it. I stared at that slice of reality, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I was afraid the bed frame would shake. The dragging sound grew louder. It was coming down the hall. I could hear the wet friction of it on the carpet runner. S, 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 H, 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 H. S, S, H, H. It was slow. Methodical. A shape entered my field of vision. It was not feet. It was not legs. It was a pale, off-white mass. It flowed into view, covering the patterned carpet. It had no clear form. It was an amoeba of flesh, the color of spoiled milk. The bottom of it seemed to ripple, leaving a faint, damp trail as it moved. It was maybe a foot high. It oozed past the door, a silent tide of living tissue. There was no head, no limbs, no features, just a slow, inexorable, silent passage. It took a full 10 seconds to cross the width of the doorway. And then it was gone. The wet, dragging sound receded down the hall, toward the living room. I stayed where I was, frozen under the bed. I listened. I heard a faint, wet plopping sound, as if it had settled onto the couch. Then, nothing. The silence returned, deeper this time. I counted. 1, 2. I counted to 100. Then I counted to 100 again. My muscles ached from the cramped position. The dust was making me want to sneeze. I fought it down, a painful pressure building in my head. Finally, shaking, I pushed myself out from under the bed. I crawled at first, then slowly got to my feet. The apartment was quiet. I stood in the bedroom doorway, listening. There was no sound from the living room. I had to see. I had to know. I crept to the bathroom on the other side of the hall, my bare feet making no noise on the wood. I needed to see my face. I needed to look in a mirror and see that my eyes were still my eyes. I pushed the bathroom door open. The room was cool. The mirror above the sink was fogged over with a thick layer of condensation, as if someone had just taken a long, hot shower. But the air was cold. The fog was impossible. My eyes focused on the center of the mirror. In the middle of the white vapor, something had been written. A single track, like one made by a fingertip, had cut cleanly through the condensation to the clear glass beneath. It was one word, written in plain, simple English. The letters were perfectly formed. Learning. My finger trembled, hovering an inch from the glass. The single word hung in the vapor, a clean black track in the white. Learning. The letters were not my handwriting forgery. They were not the alien script from the lobby. They were perfect, printed characters. Block capitals. Like a child's first attempt to copy from a book. Flawlessly executed. It was learning English. It was learning my language. I wiped my hand across the mirror. The fog smeared under my palm, blurring the word into an indistinct smudge. The glass was cold. Not just cool. It was chilled, as if it had been left in a freezer. The air in the bathroom was not steamy or humid. It was dry and cold. The condensation had no source. It was another revision. An effect without a cause. Something connected in my brain, a line drawn between 2 points of pain. The thing in the hall. The wet, dragging mass of flesh. And my father. Him, in his bed, in the final weeks. The way his breath had become a wet, ragged sound. The way his body, once strong, had become a loose, heavy weight in the sheets when I had to turn him. The similarities were there. They were faint whispers, but they were there. I had told myself it was sickness. The slow, ugly process of a body shutting down. Now a new thought, sharp and terrible, pushed its way into my mind. What if his death wasn't the end of something? What if it was the beginning? Crush of the Ahul. The process, the change. It had to have a point of origin. A ground zero. And the epicenter of this last month of my life. The single place where all the misery and exhaustion had been concentrated. Was my father's bedroom. The room where he had died. The room I had kept closed for 2 weeks, unable to face the task of clearing it out. I had to go in. I had to check. I had to know for sure. It was a simple task. Open a door. Look at a bed. Confirm that a bed was still a bed. The thought itself was a sign of the fracture in my mind, but the impulse was too strong to ignore. The parasite. I had to know if the parasite had started there. I left the bathroom, my bare feet cold on the hallway floor. The apartment remained lit by the eerie uniform glow from the screens. The alien text on them pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, like a single, shared heartbeat. It was a message I couldn't read, but the intent was clear. It was an announcement. We are here. This is our space now. I walked past the living room, averting my eyes from the couch where the wet thing had settled. I didn't want to see what it looked like now that it was still. My focus was on the closed oak door at the end of the hall, my father's room. I put my hand on the brass knob. It was ice cold, just like the mirror. My fingers recoiled for a second before I forced them to grip it. I turned the knob. It moved with a soundless, oily smoothness. I pushed the door open. The air that rolled out was not the stale, dusty air of a closed-off room. It was thick. It carried a strange electric smell, like the air after a nearby lightning strike, but underpinned with something else. A biological odor. A scent of rot that was both sweet and acrid. The smell of something growing and dying at the same time. I took a step inside. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight. The only light came from the hallway behind me, a yellow rectangle cast across the floor. It illuminated the familiar shapes. The old wooden dresser, the bookcase filled with his paperbacks, and the bed. The queen-sized bed, its dark cherry headboard pressed against the far wall, was still made. I had done it myself the day after. The blue quilted bedspread was smooth, tucked in neatly at the corners. It looked normal. It looked untouched. I walked toward it, my steps hesitant on the worn carpet. With every footfall, the smell grew stronger. The ozone tang made the fillings in my teeth ache. I reached the side of the bed. The surface of the bedspread looked solid. I put my hand out, intending to just touch it, to feel the familiar texture of the quilt. But my hand stopped. There was something else, a low vibration. It was coming up through the soles of my feet, a deep thrumming that was too low to be a sound. It was the entire floor of the room. The building. It felt like standing near a massive, idling engine. I reached out and took a corner of the bedspread between my thumb and forefinger. The fabric felt stiff, slightly damp. I pulled. It didn't lift easily. It was heavy. Logie. I braced my feet and pulled harder. The sheet came away with a faint, tearing sound, like Velcro being slowly separated. I peeled it back, revealing the white, flat sheet beneath. And then I pulled that back too. The mattress was gone. My mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The space between the headboard and the footboard, where a thick inner spring mattress and box spring should have been, was now filled with something else. It was a mass. A colossal, living mass of organic tissue. It was a nest. A pulsating, obscene nest woven directly into the wooden frame of the bed. A network of thick, milky white tendons, some as thick as my arm, were fused to the cherry wood, digging into the varnish like roots. They crisscrossed and intertwined, forming a dense, fibrous web. In the gaps between the larger tendons, a softer, pinkish-gray membrane stretched, glistening with a thin layer of clear mucus. The entire structure rose and fell with a slow, weak, systolic rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. With each beat, the fleshy membrane quivered, and the air soured further. It wasn't just a thing on the bed. It was the bed. An organ fused to furniture. My stomach turned. I took a stumbling step back, one hand flying up to cover my nose and mouth. The smell was overpowering now. It was ozone and decay and something else metallic, like old blood. I could taste it on the back of my tongue. This was the source. This was the engine. It had grown here, in the dark, gestating in my father's final vessel. My retreat was too slow. My movement, my sudden presence had registered. The rhythm of the pulsing changed. It accelerated. Thump, 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 thump. The weak beat became a frantic, agitated throbbing. The glistening membrane began to ripple faster. The air grew colder. Behind me, the bedroom door flew shut with a deafening crack. The sound was a physical blow. It was not the sound of a door swinging shut. It was the sound of wood splintering, of a lock engaging with violent, final force. The rectangle of yellow light from the hallway vanished. I was plunged into near total darkness. The only illumination was the faint, residual glow from under the door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was trapped. I was in the room, in the dark, with the nest. The bare bulb in the ceiling fixture overhead flickered once. A weak orange light sputtered to life, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. It revealed the full horror of the bed thing. In the dying light, I could see things moving beneath the translucent membrane. Dark, larval shapes, writhing and churning within the nest. Then, with a sharp pop and the tinkle of shattering glass, the bulb died. Total darkness fell. A darkness so complete it felt like a heavy blanket pressed against my eyes. I couldn't see my own hands. I couldn't see the door. I was blind. But I was not deaf. The pulsing was louder now. A wet, percussive sound filling the small room. Thump, thump, thump. And with it came a new noise. A high-pitched, chittering whine. It seemed to come from all around me. A sound that set my teeth on edge. I started backing away, my hands held out in front of me, searching for the wall, for the door. My heel caught on the edge of the rug and I fell backwards, landing hard on the floor. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I lay there, gasping, disoriented. Something moved in the darkness. A faint light appeared above the nest. It wasn't a bulb. It was a soft greenish-white glow, like a firefly's light, but stronger. It emanated from a single point on the central mass. I watched, frozen, as a shape began to separate from the whole. A single tendon, thinner than the others, detached itself. It lifted into the air, glowing with its own internal, chemical light. It looked like a viper rising from a basket, swaying for a moment in the blackness. Then it struck. There was a sound like a bullwhip cracking the air. It moved faster than my eyes could follow. I didn't dodge. I simply jerked my head out of pure reflex. I felt a rush of displaced air against my cheek. A fraction of a second later, there was a loud thwack and the sound of splintering wood from the wall right where my head had been. I scrambled backwards on all fours, crab walking away from the bed, my breath coming in ragged, silent sobs. I couldn't make a sound. I couldn't repeat the noise from before. Another mistake. My retreating hand hit something hard and wooden. I glanced back. It was his cane. My father's old walking cane. Oak with a simple brass handle, leaning against the bookcase where he'd left it. My fingers closed around the smooth wood. It was solid. It was real. It was a weapon. I got to my feet, holding the cane in a two-handed grip like a baseball bat. The glowing tendril was still hovering in the air, its light pulsing in time with the nest's frantic heartbeat. It coiled back, preparing for another strike. I didn't wait. I charged forward, screaming, a raw, wordless bellow of fury and terror. I swung the cane with all my strength. The tip of the cane met the glowing tendril midair. There was no solid impact. It was like hitting a cable made of hard gristle. The tendril recoiled, its light flickering wildly. I didn't stop. I brought the cane down again, this time on the main body of the nest. The impact was disgusting. The cane sank deep into the soft, yielding mass with a wet, squelching thud. It felt like driving a stake into a heap of waterlogged meat. The nest convulsed. And it screamed. It was not a sound made for human ears. It was a piercing, ultrasonic shriek that bypassed my eardrums and went straight to my brain. A pressure wave that felt like a sharp nail being driven into my skull, right between my eyes. My teeth vibrated. The room swam in a haze of green-tinted pain. I squeezed my eyes shut, staggering back, one hand clamped over my head. My own scream was cut off, choked by the sheer physical agony of the noise. The cane fell from my numb fingers, and then, as suddenly as it began, the shriek stopped. The silence that followed was immense, broken only by the ringing in my ears and my own harsh breathing. The bioluminescent glow from the nest had faded. The room was black again. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, my fingers clumsy and shaking. I found it. My thumb slid across the screen, trying to find the flashlight icon. It took 3 tries. A bright white beam cut through the darkness. I pointed it at the bed. The nest was inert. The frantic pulsing had ceased. It was just a mound of flesh now. My second blow had torn a deep gash in the central mass. It was not bleeding blood. A thick, iridescent fluid, like crude oil but with shifting rainbow colors, was oozing slowly from the wound, dripping onto the floor with soft, wet plops. I swept the beam of light across the damage, my stomach heaving at the sight. The cane lay half submerged in the torn flesh. The nest was broken, wounded, maybe dead. Then the light fell on something in the very center of the gash I had created. Something was glinting. I took a hesitant step closer, the light from my phone shaking. There, nestled deep within the torn fibrous tissue, preserved and held perfectly in the center of the nest's core, was an object. It was untouched by the viscous fluid around it, a small circle of gold, a dark blue stone. It was my father's college graduation ring. The blood drained from my face, my breath caught in my throat. I knew that ring. I knew the weight of it. I had held it in my hand. I had slipped it onto his finger in the funeral home, just before they closed the casket. I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic and reason, that that ring was supposed to be 6 feet underground, buried with the body that was no longer his. I didn't move. My arm, holding the phone, was locked straight. The beam of light was a solid, white spear pinning the ring to the center of the nest. It was a circle of gold. It was a dark blue stone. It was his. My lungs refused to work. The air I needed was trapped somewhere below my throat. The thought wasn't a thought. It was a physical impact. A piece of information so heavy it felt like it had fractured my skull. That ring is in the ground. I put it there. I watched them lower the casket. But it was here, held in the core of this thing, as if it were a pearl. as if it were a seed. A wet plop from the floor broke the spell. A drop of the oily fluid had landed near my bare foot. I flinched back, stumbling out of the room, my heels skidding on the slickness spreading from the gash in the nest. I slammed the bedroom door shut. The latch didn't catch. The door had been broken when it was forced shut. It just bounced against the frame with a hollow thump. I didn't care. I just needed it out of my sight. I leaned against the wall in the hallway, my whole body trembling. My phone was still clutched in my hand, its light now painting a frantic, dancing circle on the ceiling. The screens in the living room continued their silent, rhythmic pulse. The alien text scrolled, a language for a world that was no longer mine. The air was still thick with the smell of ozone and butchered meat. I needed to see something real. One thing. One anchor to the world that existed yesterday. I lurched toward the living room, my feet sticking faintly to the floorboards. I avoided looking at the couch, skirted the dark, heavy shape settled on its cushions. I went straight to the large picture window that looked out over the street. My hands, slick with cold sweat, fumbled with the cord for the blinds. I pulled. They rattled upwards, revealing the night. Streetlights cast yellow pools on the empty pavement. Across the way stood the brick and glass facade of the apartment building opposite mine. The Caldwell. A 6-story brownstone. Solid and predictable. I had looked at it every day for 5 years. I knew its pattern of lit and unlit windows. I knew the chip in the cornice on the top right corner. It was my baseline, my piece of the old world. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, my breath fogging a small patch in front of my face. I just needed to see it. To confirm it. And then I saw it. The Caldwell was no longer a 6-story building, it was 7. My mind refused it. I squeezed my eyes shut, my knuckles white where I gripped the window frame. No, I whispered, the sound a dry rasp. I opened them again. The building stared back, unblinking, corrected. There were 6 floors of familiar brown brick, and then, crammed between the 5th and what should have been the 6th floor, was another one. A new floor. The insertion was crude, a work of impossible brutalist architecture. The bricks were a slightly different color, a darker, angrier red. The windows were narrower, taller, out of proportion with the rest of the building's classic design. The floor below it seemed compressed, the lintels over its windows bowing slightly downwards. The floor above it looked like it was perched precariously on top, the lines all wrong. It was a digital error made manifest in concrete and steel. A bug in the code of the world. The sickness rose from my stomach into my throat. The nightmare was not contained. It was not in the bed. It was not in my apartment. It was outside. It was everywhere. I raised my phone, my thumb shaking as I fumbled to open the camera app. I switched to video mode, pinching the screen to zoom. The digital image grew grainy, but the details became sharper. I focused on the new, 9th floor of the Caldwell. The windows were dark, but not empty. There were figures moving inside. I held my breath, trying to steady the phone. The movements were wrong. They were not human. A shape would cross a window, its motion not fluid, but a series of distinct, sharp shifts in position. A stuttering, lagging clip. A silhouette would raise an arm, and the limb would seem to stretch, elongating for a second before snapping back into place. They moved like faulty animations, their bodies untethered from the normal laws of physics and biology. They were editing themselves in real time. Behind me, a sound made me jump so hard my teeth clicked together. A burst of electronic static, then the smooth, polished tones of a news broadcast filled the apartment. I spun around. The main television screen, the largest of the monitors that now littered my living room, had turned on by itself. The alien script had vanished from its surface, replaced by a brightly lit news studio. A female news anchor sat behind a sleek, glass desk. She looked directly into the camera. Directly at me. Her face was almost perfect. Blonde hair in a severe, professional cut. A crisp blue blazer. But it was a bad copy. Her features were subtly misaligned. One eye was a fraction of an inch higher than the other. Her smile was too wide, stretching just a bit too far towards her ears, showing too many teeth. It was a predator's smile crammed into a human face. A new era of unparalleled connection, she was saying, her voice a soothing, synthesized melody. The initial phase of the glorious global integration proceeds on schedule. Reports from all major metropolitan centers indicate a smooth and seamless transition. Citizens are urged to remain calm and embrace the coming unity. What you are experiencing is not an end, but a beginning. A revision for the better. A world corrected. Her smile widened further. Her head tilted, a motion that was too quick, too bird-like. There may be minor architectural and biological discrepancies during the upload. These are temporary artifacts of the old code. Do not be alarmed, everything is being harmonized. Everything is being made new. I backed away from the screen, a low noise of dread building in my chest. The screen was talking about me. It was talking about the building across the street. It was explaining the horror. It was a press release for the end of the world. Knock. 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 The sound was sharp, hard and real. It came from my front door. It was the most normal sound I had heard all night, and it was the most terrifying. Silence. The anchor on the screen was frozen, her impossibly wide smile locked in place. The pulsing from the other screens had stopped. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Knock, knock, knock. A voice followed this time, muffled by the solid wood of the door. Mr. Hayes? This is security. Got a noise complaint from one of your neighbors. Everything all right in there? The voice. It was Mr. Henderson, a portly man in his late 60s who had worked in this building for a decade. A man who always had a kind word for my father. A human voice. A piece of the world I was losing. A flicker of possibility. So insane it almost made me laugh. Sparked in my mind. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was having a breakdown. The grief. The exhaustion. Maybe Mr. Henderson was real, and if I opened the door, the building across the street would have 6 floors again, and the news anchor would be a normal woman, and the thing in my father's room would just be a mattress. Hope was a poison. I moved on silent feet, my body low. I crept to the front door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I avoided the floorboards I knew would creak. The air was cold on my skin. I reached the door and pressed my eye to the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted the hallway, bending the walls into a long, warped tunnel. At its center stood Mr. Henderson. He was there. His gray security uniform, the slight paunch, the thinning hair. For a full second, relief washed over me, so potent it made my knees weak. Then he shifted his weight. The light of the hallway caught his face at a different angle. And I saw it. The same error. The same terrible signature. His left eye was perfectly normal, a watery blue set in a bed of wrinkles. His right eye was a third larger than it should have been. It bulged slightly from its socket. The iris a flat, depthless black. It was a doll's eye, poorly fitted. It didn't track with his other one. It stared, fixed, slightly to the left of the peephole. A sloppy cut-and-paste job on a human face. I pulled back from the peephole as if the brass had been heated red hot. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I stood frozen in the small entryway of my apartment, a thin plank of wood separating me from that copy. The knocking came again, harder this time. The door vibrated against my shoulder. Mr. Hayes, I know you're in there. Please open the door. Just need to do a quick check. The voice was still Henderson's, cheerful, neighborly, but the thing wearing his face was not. I started backing away, placing each foot with surgical care. One step. Another. The floor felt like a minefield. Any sound would betray me. I reached the edge of the living room. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was a listening silence. I imagined the thing on the other side of the door, its head cocked, its one good eye and one monstrous eye staring at the wood, waiting. Then came a new sound. A faint, metallic jingle. The sound of a key ring. I stopped breathing. The world narrowed to the front door and the sound that was now coming from its lock. A soft, scraping noise. Metal on metal. The unmistakable sound of a key, the wrong key, being slid carefully, deliberately, into the lock of my apartment. My sanctuary. My trap. The tumblers inside the lock began to turn with a series of soft, oily clicks. The final tumbler fell into place with a definitive click. The sound cut through the hum of the monitors. It was a small sound. A clean sound. It meant the bolt was thrown. It meant the door was unlocked. My body moved before my brain gave it an order. I shoved off the wall, my bare feet slapping against the sticky floorboards. I did not run toward the bedrooms. I ran toward the kitchen. away from the door. It was the only direction. The monitors in the living room cast shifting, geometric patterns of light and shadow across my path. I half-leapt over a low stack of them, my hip catching the corner of a screen. A smear of blue light followed me. I didn't look back. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the faint green glow of the microwave clock. 10:17 p.m. The memory of Mr. Henderson's face, the doll's eye, the mismatched parts, was burned behind my own eyes. I heard the faint creak of the front door opening. There was only the window. I lunged for it, my hands slapping against the cold glass above the sink. The lock was a small metal lever, stiff from disuse. My wet palm slipped off it. I tried again, my nails digging into the painted wood of the sash. The lever gave with a sharp crack. I shoved the window upwards. It screeched in its frame, fighting me. Cold air rushed in, smelling of asphalt and rain. It was the first clean air I had breathed in hours. I scrambled onto the countertop, knocking a half-empty glass into the sink where it shattered. I didn't register the noise. I was already halfway through the opening, my stomach scraping against the rough wood of the window frame. My feet found the grated metal platform of the fire escape. The cold bit into the soles of my feet instantly. I pulled the rest of my body through and stood, panting, in the open air, 5 stories above the street. The wind was sharp. It whipped my thin shirt against my skin. For a moment I just stood there, my knuckles white where I gripped the iron railing. I needed to go down, get to the street, run. I looked over the edge, and the world froze. It was not my city. The street below was the same, the cars parked along the curb were the same, but beyond it, the skyline was a fever dream, rendered in steel and glass. Buildings I had known my entire life were gone. In their place stood new structures. One was a tower of black glass that twisted on itself, ascending into the bruised violet of the twilight sky like a corkscrew. Another, further east, was a block of concrete so massive it seemed to bend the light around it, its surface pocked with windows that were not square but long, narrow, vertical slits, like gashes from a knife. The familiar curve of the Morrison Bridge was still there in the distance, but it had been appended. A second, steeper arch rose from its center, connected to nothing, serving no purpose, a line of pointless geometry drawn against the clouds. My gaze drifted down from the impossible architecture, back to the world I was supposed to be able to touch. The street. I had to get to the street. I took a step down the rickety metal stairs. My foot hovered over the next step. I saw the people. They were walking on the sidewalks below. A man in a suit. A woman with a grocery bag. A teenager on a skateboard. But their motion was unified. Their pace was identical. Every right foot hit the pavement at the exact same instant. Every left arm swung forward in perfect metronomic unison. It was the movement of a machine, of pistons and gears, not of flesh and bone. The teenager on the skateboard was not pushing. He glided along the concrete, his body rigid, his arms locked at his sides. As if feeling my stare, one of them stopped. The man in the suit. He did not slow down, his motion simply ceased. Then the woman with the grocery bag stopped. Then the teenager. One by one, in a silent cascading wave, every person on the street below came to a halt. The quiet hum of the city settled over everything. Then, they looked up. It was not a human motion. It was not a series of individual decisions. 100 heads, perhaps more, snapped upward as one. They all tilted to the left. The same angle. The exact same degree of tilt. 100 pale, expressionless faces turned towards the 5th floor fire escape of my building. Towards me. They saw me. I was the single discordant note in their symphony. The one piece of the old code that hadn't been harmonized. My breath hitched. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a sound. I had to move. Up or down. Down was to them. Up was to the roof. To nowhere. A sound from below made my decision for me. A wet, tearing noise, like fabric being ripped. From a 4th floor window directly beneath me, something white erupted. It was a tendril, thick as my arm, the color of bleached bone and glistening with the same oily fluid that had soaked my father's bed. It shot out with incredible speed, a boneless limb of pale gristle against the dark brick. It coiled around the central support pillar of the fire escape, its grip tightening with a sound of groaning, protesting metal. The entire structure shuddered. I grabbed the railing to keep my balance as the platform vibrated violently under my feet. The tendril pulsed, a thick muscular contraction, and shook the fire escape again, harder this time. A bolt from the railing near my hand shot loose and pinged off into the darkness below. Another window shattered on the 3rd floor. A second tendril, then a third, burst forth. They lashed out, slapping against the brickwork, searching. The building was alive. The building was hatching. Down was not an option. I turned and scrambled upwards. My bare feet slipped on the grated steps. The cold metal bit into my skin. The whole structure swayed and groaned with each rhythmic shake from the creature below. My lungs burned. My only thought was the next handhold, the next step. I climbed past the 6th floor, past the 7th. The shaking became more frantic. I could hear more windows breaking below me, a chorus of destruction chasing me up the side of the building. My hand closed over the rough tar paper edge of the roof. I hauled myself over, my body collapsing onto the gravelly surface. I lay there, gasping, my cheek pressed against the rough grit. The shaking stopped. The sounds of the tendrils faded. Or perhaps I was just too far away to hear them. There was only the sound of my own ragged breathing and the high, thin whistle of the wind. I stayed there for a long time. Minutes. I counted my breaths. I watched the small pebbles in front of my face. They were real. They were solid. I was on the roof. I was, for a second, safe. Eventually, I pushed myself into a sitting position. My body ached. A long, red scrape ran down my shin where I had hit it on the stairs. I looked out over the city. It was still there. The twisted towers. The broken bridge. The silent, synchronized army on the streets below, still standing, still watching my building. My escape hadn't bought me freedom. It had only bought me a higher vantage point from which to witness the end. I was trapped on an island in the sky. A sense of finality washed over me. A cold acceptance. The fight was over. I had seen too much. The thing on the news anchor's face. Mr. Henderson's eye. The architecture. The people. The creature in my building. It wasn't a haunting. It was a replacement. A global find and replace operation. And the old version of the world was being deleted, character by character. I leaned back on my hands and looked up, seeking the only thing left that should have been untouched. The only constant I had ever known. The night sky was clear. The stars were sharp points of light in the deepening darkness. And there was the moon. It was nearly full, a great, silver disk hanging in the void. Familiar. Unchanging. A piece of the real world. A final anchor. I stared at it, letting its old steady light fall on my face, and I saw the scar. On its upper left quadrant, where the sea of rain should have been a smooth gray plain, there was now a feature that had not been there last night. It was not there when my father was alive. It was a crater. A perfect circle of absolute blackness. So vast it seemed impossible. It was a hole punched through the moon's surface, a wound in the fabric of the sky itself. Its edges were sharp, fresh. It did not reflect any light. It only consumed it. It was a dead spot in the heavens, a piece of the new, corrected world, staring back at me. There was no up or down. There was no escape. The error was not in the building. It was in everything. The gravel bit into my cheek. Each small stone was a separate, sharp point of pressure. I felt the slow, warm trickle of blood from the scrape on my shin. The wind was a constant, thin noise in my ears, pulling at my shirt, making the fabric snap against my skin. For a full minute that was the entire world. Gravel, blood, and wind. I was on the roof. I had gotten away. I was alive. I pushed myself up, my palms flat against the gritty tar paper. My muscles screamed. I sat with my back against the low parapet wall, my legs stretched out in front of me. The city was laid out before me, a panorama of impossible shapes under a bruised sky. The corkscrew tower, the gashed concrete block, the bridge with its useless second arch. It wasn't a nightmare. A nightmare ends. This was just the view. The silent, waiting figures on the street below hadn't moved. They were a congregation of statues, their heads all tilted at the same unnatural angle, facing my building. Waiting. I dragged my eyes away from them. I had to look somewhere else. I scanned the skyline, my gaze moving from one rooftop to the next. The building to my left, a slightly shorter brick tenement, had a water tower on its roof. And a man. He was standing near the edge, his silhouette stark against the fading light. He wasn't cowering. He wasn't trying to find a way down. He had a telescope on a tripod, angled up toward the sky, towards the moon. As I watched, a woman joined him, handing him something. A thermos, maybe. They stood together, side by side. There was no panic in their posture. Their movements were slow, deliberate. On another building further down, a family was having a picnic. I could make out a blanket spread on the tar paper, a basket. Two small figures that had to be children running in a tight circle. They were pointing up. Their small arms shot up, tiny fingers jabbing at the sky, at the scarred moon. Their movements were jerky, excited. My gaze swept across a dozen rooftops. On each one, the same scene played out in different ways. People. Alone or in small groups. Some had chairs. Some had cameras with long lenses. One group had lit a small charcoal grill, the smoke, a thin gray ribbon rising into the air. They were all looking up, not with terror, not with confusion. They were watching a celestial event, a meteor shower, an eclipse. Their faces, even from this distance, were turned to the heavens with a sense of arrival, of profound and placid welcome. They were not witnessing the end of their world. They were witnessing the birth of a new one. And they approved. My stomach turned. I was the one on the ground, scrabbling like an animal. I was the one who saw a monster in the architecture. I was the one who saw a wound in the sky. They saw progress. They saw beauty. I was the single, screaming malfunction in a city that had received a glorious, silent update. A vibration started against my hip. It was a low, insistent buzz. My phone. The last time it had buzzed, Mr. Henderson had been on the line. I fumbled in my pocket, my fingers clumsy and stiff. I pulled it out. The screen was black, but it pulsed with white text. It was not a call. It was not a text message. It was a system-wide alert, the kind that preempts every other function. The header wasn't from the government. Not Presidential Alert or Amber Alert. It was just a single symbol, like a stylized eye made of 3 intersecting arcs. Below it, the screen was filled with characters I didn't recognize. They weren't letters from any alphabet I had ever seen. They were runes, sharp and geometric, a mix of complex knots and simple, brutalist lines. They glowed on the screen, a language untethered to human history. I stared at them, my mind unable to process the shapes. And then, at the very bottom, a single line of English appeared, as if translated for a legacy user. Copy process 99% complete. Thank you for your cooperation. The phone felt heavy in my hand, like a block of lead. Cooperation. I had not cooperated. I had run. I had fought. I had slammed doors and shattered glass and clawed my way into the cold night air. The message wasn't for me. It was for them. For the man with the telescope. For the family with the picnic basket. For the synchronized walkers on the street. Their transition had been seamless. They had woken up, seen the new sky, and understood. Their minds had been overwritten as easily as a line of code. The fear, the revulsion, the desperate need to escape. That was my bug. That was the last 1% of the old data refusing to be erased. A sound cut through the wind. It came from behind me. A heavy, metal door. A long, grating squeal of rusted hinges being forced open. The roof access. My body moved without a command. I scrambled on all fours, my bare feet slapping against the gravel, and threw myself behind the nearest solid object. The large, humming metal box of an industrial air conditioning unit. I pressed my back against its vibrating metal shell, pulling my knees to my chest. The smell of dust and hot ozone filled my nostrils. I held my breath, listening. Footsteps. Soft. Measured. Not the frantic slapping of someone escaping. Not the heavy tread of a pursuer. Just a calm, even pace on the gravel. The footsteps stopped. Silence. The wind whistled around the corner of the AC unit. The hum of the machine next to me was a low thrum in my bones. Leo? The voice was a razor blade down my spine. I knew it better than my own. It was my sister's voice, Lily. Leo? What are you doing up here? I squeezed my eyes shut. It couldn't be. She lived across town. She wouldn't be here. She couldn't be here. The tendrils. The locked doors. How could she have gotten in? How could she have gotten to the roof? It's cold, she said. Her voice was gentle, full of a soft, reasonable concern that was more terrifying than any scream. "You'll get sick." I stayed perfectly still, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. "Don't answer. Don't make a sound. She isn't real, she's a trick. She's a voice in my head." The footsteps started again, a slow crunching of gravel getting closer. She was circling the unit. "There's no need to hide, Leo. It's over now. The noise is done." I risked a look around the edge of the metal casing. She was standing 20 feet away, her back to me, looking out at the altered city. She was wearing the same gray hoodie and jeans she'd had on yesterday when she stopped by. Her brown hair was tied back in a loose ponytail. She looked completely, utterly normal. And that was the most horrible thing I had ever seen. She turned, as if sensing my gaze. Her eyes found me, crouched and filthy behind the machine. There was no surprise on her face, only a mild, pitying disappointment. "Oh, there you are." She took a step toward me. I flinched back, pressing myself harder against the humming metal. "Don't be scared," she said, her voice dropping to a soothing whisper. "It's all right. It just looks a little different, but it's better, isn't it? Everything is so clear now." She gestured with an open hand at the twisted skyline, at the wounded moon. "Isn't it beautiful? Don't you see?" Her placid acceptance was a physical force. It pushed the air from my lungs. She was looking at the end of the world like it was a freshly renovated kitchen. She saw the impossible hole in the moon and thought it was an improvement. The process had not just taken her, it had convinced her. "What do you want?" I managed to say. The words came out as a dry rasp, barely a sound. "I came to get you," she said, taking another step. "We were worried." She smiled, and the universe ended for a second time. It was not her smile. It was a careful, precise arrangement of her facial muscles. It was the smile from the photograph on our father's bedside table. The photograph I had looked at every day for 6 months. The one I found this morning, where his familiar, warm grin had been replaced by a tight, distant, symmetrical curve of the lips that was not his. An editor's correction. This was that same smile, now living on my sister's face. A small, perfect, alien gesture. She saw the recognition in my eyes. The smile widened, just a fraction. It didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were calm. Her eyes were patient. They were the eyes of a biologist looking at a specimen in its final, frantic moments. She took one more step, close enough now that I could see the faint constellation of freckles on her nose. The last remnant of the real Lily. "Dad misses you," she said. The words hung in the cold air between us. "Dad misses you." My heart did not pound. It did not race. It felt like a heavy stone had been dropped into my chest, a dead weight pulling everything down. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I was not a cornered animal anymore. An animal still has hope, the instinct to bite and claw its way out. I was a specimen pinned to a board. The struggle was over. It was time for observation. Slowly I pushed myself up from behind the humming air conditioner. My knees cracked. The gravel scraped against my palms, a final, small pain. I stood, my jeans torn, my shirt stained, my body a collection of aches and tremors. I faced her. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she did not brush it away. Her eyes, my sister's eyes, remained fixed on me. They held no malice, they held no love. They held a profound, bottomless patience. The patience of a clock. "Lily," I said. My own voice was a stranger to me, a dry rustle of leaves. "Don't fight it anymore, Leo," she said. Her tone was the one she used to use when I was a child, when I was afraid of the dark. Gentle, reassuring, monstrous. "It doesn't hurt, it's just an update, a better version." She took another step, her sneakers crunching softly on the roofing stones. She was close enough now that I could see the reflection of the scarred moon in her pupils. She lifted a hand, not to me, but to the sky above. Her finger pointed upward. "Look," she whispered. The sound was almost carried away by the wind. "The Big Dipper. It's perfect now. They added another star. For balance." I forced myself to look up. My neck was stiff. The bruised canvas of the sky was peppered with familiar constellations. But there, at the end of the Dipper's handle, where Alcade should have been the last star, was another. A new point of light. It did not twinkle like the others. It shone with a steady, deep, violet glow, a pinprick of frozen energy that seemed to drink the light around it. It made the entire constellation look asymmetrical. It made it look damaged. Complete. My stomach recoiled. It was like looking at a hand with a sixth finger. I lowered my gaze back to her, to the thing wearing my sister's face. As I stared, something happened. for a fraction of a second. The image of her wavered. The edges of her form, the line of her jaw, the curve of her shoulder, they blurred. It was like looking at a heat haze rising from asphalt, a distortion in the air itself. The texture of her skin seemed to lose its pores, becoming smooth and waxy, like a department store mannequin. Beneath the facade, beneath a copy of Lily, I saw a flicker. A flash of something stark white, something without features, wet and embryonic. It was there and gone in the time it takes to blink. A rendering error. My resistance, my refusal to accept the new data, was making the program lag. It was making the imitation fail. Her expression didn't change, but her smile, that terrible edited smile from the photograph, tightened by a millimeter. The correction was reasserting itself. Your perception is unstable, she stated, not as a criticism but as a clinical diagnosis. The old data is causing conflicts. It will be resolved. She stepped forward again. I stepped back. My heel hit the low parapet wall at the edge of the roof. There was nowhere else to go. Below me, the impossible city waited. The silent figures on the street had not moved. They were still watching, waiting for the final piece of software to install. It doesn't have to be a conflict, Leo, she said, her voice dropping lower. All that noise, all that pain you carry around, the months at the hospital, watching him fade. The lists of medications, the smell of the room, the weight of it. You can let all of that go. Why would you want to keep it? We can be a family again, all of us. Dad is waiting. The words were a key, unlocking a door deep inside me. She was offering an escape. Not death. Something else. An erasure. A clean slate. To have the memory of my father's slow, agonizing decay wiped away. To forget the exhaustion that had hollowed me out for half a year. To forget the small, crushing failures. The moments of impatience, the guilt. To have him back. Not as he was at the end, but as a perfected copy, smiling that new, symmetrical smile. To have Lily back, her mind overwritten with this placid acceptance. To join the silent congregation on the streets and the placid observers on the rooftops, looking up at the perfect sky with approving eyes. All I had to do was let go. Stop fighting the signal. Accept the update. I had a final choice. I could launch myself off the roof, a final messy act of defiance that would change nothing. A bug deleting itself. Or I could surrender. I could let the parasite in, let the ancient, cosmic editor scrub the slate clean. Oblivion or assimilation. I thought of him. Not the edited photograph. The real man. I remembered the rasp of his breathing in the quiet of the night. I remembered the surprising weight of his frail hand in mine. I remembered the scent of lemon furniture polish and old paperbacks in his room. I remembered the frustration and the bone-deep weariness. I remembered the love, tangled and complicated and real. It was agonizing, it was human, it was mine. That pain, that grief, that messy, imperfect memory, it was the last piece of the old world that was truly mine. It was the proof that I had existed, that he had existed. I would not give it up. I looked at the thing that was my sister. I did not scream. I did not fight. I did not run. I closed my eyes. The wind stopped. The hum of the air conditioner ceased. The cold departed. For a moment, there was nothing. A silent, black void. Not frightening, just empty. Then I opened my eyes. I was standing in my father's room. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The faint, familiar scent of lemon polish and old books filled my nostrils. The bed was neatly made, the quilt pulled up tight. On the nightstand beside the lamp sat a book. It was a biography I had bought him. The cover was a soft, pale sky blue, the exact shade I remembered. Not navy, not royal, sky blue. A string quartet was playing softly from the small speaker on his desk. Vivaldi. Each note was clear, precise, exactly as it should be. On the wall opposite the bed hung the framed photograph. I walked towards it, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. I looked at my father's face. He was smiling. It was his real smile. A little crooked, a little tired at the edges, crinkling the corners of his eyes. Warm, familiar. It was him. A wave of something washed over me. It felt like relief, but it was too clean, too absolute. It felt like the resolution of a dissonant chord. Everything was right. The book, the music, the photograph. The world had snapped back into place. The errors had been fixed. The nightmare was over. I turned and walked towards the full-length mirror hanging on the back of the bedroom door. I needed to see myself. I needed to confirm that I was whole, that I was back. I looked at my reflection. My face stared back at me. The scrapes were gone. The dirt was gone. I was wearing the clean clothes I had put on that morning. I looked, rested. I told my reflection to smile. My lips pulled back from my teeth. It was a smooth, even motion. The smile was a perfect, symmetrical curve. It did not reach my eyes. My eyes. I leaned closer to the glass. They had always been my mother's eyes, a matching pair. Now, the right pupil was a fraction of a millimeter wider than the left. A tiny, almost imperceptible imbalance. A subtle editor's note. The smile remained on my face. It felt like a mask I had forgotten I was wearing. The muscles felt distant, controlled by a foreign will. I was looking at the last, corrected error. And then, a thought surfaced in my mind. It was not my own thought. It did not bubble up from my consciousness. It simply appeared, fully formed, clear and cold as glass, like a line of text appearing on a black screen. Calibration complete. Reality stabilized.